The dress arrived in a box that smelled of another woman's perfume, and Catherine knew before she lifted the lid that it was going to cost her something. It had belonged to the Countess's daughter, dead 7 years, the subject of no conversation Catherine had ever been permitted to hear in full. The gown was sapphire wool crepe, structured at the shoulder in a way that was 20 years behind the current fashion and, somehow, precisely because of that, beyond it. Catherine had remade it herself in 3 evenings by candlelight in her room off the Countess's Marylebone house, taking in the waist, dropping the hem by 2 careful inches, replacing the buttons with ones she'd kept from her mother's good coat. The result was something that did not look like money. It looked like intention. She had worn it once before. She did not think about that now. The Countess, Lady Maren Ashby, 74, magnificent, and, in the habit of treating inconvenient facts like letters she had not opened, had collapsed at 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the gala. Not gravely. A spell of dizziness, the physician said, a matter of rest and no stairs. But she had committed to attending, and Lady Ashby did not uncommit from things, and so she had sent Catherine instead with her card and her apologies and the instruction to represent the charitable society's interests and not embarrass either of them. Catherine had stood in the Countess's hallway holding the card for a full 30 seconds. Then, she had gone upstairs and put on the sapphire dress. The gala was held in the East Gallery of Kensington, which Catherine had never entered and which turned out to be the sort of room that made you aware, immediately and without kindness, of every economy you had ever made. The ceiling was painted. The chandeliers were not attempting subtlety. The women who moved beneath them wore gowns that represented more capital than Catherine's father had managed across an entire career in the church, and they wore them with the particular ease of people who had never had to think about what a thing cost before they put it on. Catherine counted the candles in the nearest sconce. 12. She counted again. Still 12. She delivered the Countess's card to the receiving secretary, accepted a glass of something that turned out to be champagne, and positioned herself near a column where she could observe the room without appearing to be doing so. This was a skill she had refined across 11 years in other people's houses. You learned to be useful without being present. You learned that quality of attention had a price. The room was performing itself with great dedication. She watched it. She did not watch the Duke of Clarence arrive, because she had positioned herself deliberately away from the entrance. She had calculated, correctly, that the entrance was where the performance would be most concentrated. She became aware of him the way you become aware of a change in air pressure, not through any single signal but through the cumulative shift of a room's orientation. Every person in the gallery had moved, by degrees, until they were facing a point near the far doors. Like a compass needle. She had not noticed herself doing it until she was already doing it. She looked. He was not what she had expected, which was foolish, because she had not expected anything. She had no picture in her mind to be corrected. He was simply present in a way that the room accommodated, tall in a way that had nothing to do with height, wearing his formal dress the way some people wear their own faces, without consultation. He was speaking to a man in military decoration and not looking anywhere in particular. Then, he was looking at her. Not at the room. Not at the column. At her. Catherine looked back at the candles. 14. She had miscounted. She spent the next 40 minutes being precisely as useful as the Countess's card required and, no more, speaking with 2 members of the Charitable Society Committee about the Winter Relief Fund, eating nothing because the food required plates and plates required standing still in the open, and not looking in the direction of the Duke of Clarence more than was explicable by the general architecture of the room. He crossed toward her at 9:20. Not toward the committee women. Not toward the secretary with her clipboard. Toward her. She had time to think, there is someone behind me he is walking toward. She had time to turn slightly and confirm there was not. Miss, he stopped at a reasonable distance. A considered distance. Forgive me. I don't have your name. The champagne glass was cold in her hand. The candles were 12. She was almost certain they were 12. Ashworth, she said. Catherine Ashworth. I'm attending on behalf of Lady Ashby. She was taken ill this afternoon and, Ashworth. He said it once. Quietly. The way you say a word you intend to remember. She did not know what to do with the pause that followed, so she did nothing, which turned out to be correct. The Charitable Society's Winter Fund, he said. I understand there's a proposal before the committee about expanding the remit to the northern counties. She knew about the proposal. She had drafted 2/3 of it. Yes, she said. There is. What do you think of it? She looked at him. He was waiting with the patience of a man who asked questions he actually wanted answered. This was not, in her experience, a feature of how men in his position addressed women in hers. I think it's overdue, she said carefully. You think more than that? She thought, that is not a question either. Yes, she said. I do. He almost smiled. Not quite. I'd like to hear the rest of it. She told him. Not everything, it was a gala, not a committee room, but the shape of it, the reasoning, the specific gap in the current provision that the expansion would address. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual. He asked one question that demonstrated he had actually absorbed what she said, which was more unusual. When she finished, the room had shifted around them without her noticing. Someone with a tray appeared and retreated. A small zone of space had cleared around where they stood, as though by arrangement, though Catherine was certain no arrangement had been made. Miss Ashworth, he said. The way he said it still. That particular storage. Like filing something in a place you will know how to find. Your Grace, she said, and curtsied, because the conversation had a natural close and she was not going to make the mistake of waiting for him to close it. She walked back toward the column. Her chest was doing something that had no protocol. Nothing in her 11 years in other people's houses had given her a procedure for this, and she was a person who relied on procedures. 12 candles. She was certain this time. She had been invisible in great houses for 11 years. Being seen felt like a wound she hadn't asked for. The morning arrived with thin winter light and the particular cold of stone corridors that no fire fully reached. Catherine had slept in the Countess's assigned rooms, a suite she had navigated once before at a different house visit and which still struck her as excessive, and risen at 6 to draft correspondence the Countess required before breakfast. This was her function. It was a function she understood. Aldous Pemberton, the Duke's equerry, a contained man of perhaps 40, with the practiced stillness of someone who read rooms for a living, appeared at 9 with a formal invitation for the Countess's party to tour the East Wing Portrait Gallery at 11. Lady Ashby, improved and, reclining on a chaise with the satisfaction of someone who had been correctly unwell, received this with gracious inevitability. You'll accompany me, of course, she told Catherine, in the tone she used for things that were not questions. The portrait gallery was long and cold and magnificent, and Catherine kept herself to Lady Ashby's left, the correct position, and offered the occasional murmured assistance with names and dates when the Countess required it. She was not looking at anything in particular. She was certainly not looking at the Duke, who had materialized at the gallery's far end with the economy of a man who did not need to enter rooms because rooms simply arranged themselves to contain him. He moved toward them. Toward Lady Ashby, naturally. He was attentive, correct, asked after her health with what appeared to be genuine concern, and Lady Ashby received this with the practiced warmth of a woman who had been navigating these exchanges since before Frederick was born. Then, Lady Ashby was drawn into conversation by the committee chairwoman, and Catherine was left standing alone before a portrait of a woman in a blue dress. The woman in the portrait was perhaps 30. The dress was a deep, particular blue, the blue of winter dusk before it fully commits to dark. She had the expression of someone who had just said something they had decided in advance not to regret. "My great-aunt," said a voice beside her. On the occasion of her engagement to a man she did not choose. Catherine did not startle. She had practiced not startling. "She does not look unhappy." "No," Frederick said. She was skilled at that. They stood for a moment, looking at the portrait. The painting was very good. The blue was very accurate. Catherine became aware that her own dress, the sapphire crepe, which she had worn again because it was the only appropriate thing she had and because the Countess had said nothing against it, was not a dissimilar color. She did not say this. She wondered if he had noticed it. She looked at the loose thread on the upholstery of the chair nearest the portrait and counted the warp of the weave. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're from the West Country, he said. She looked at him. Herefordshire, yes. How you mentioned Ledbury to Lady Ashby's maid yesterday evening. Small market town, cathedral close nearby, good autumn light. I've ridden through it. He had remembered the name of her village. She had mentioned it once, in passing, to someone else entirely. He had simply remembered it. You have a remarkable memory, she said, which was not what she meant, but what she meant had no correct form. Only for things I pay attention to, he said, and moved on to the next portrait before she could identify what to do with that sentence. The tour continued. She kept her position. She was useful when useful was required. She did not examine the space between what he had said and what it meant, because examining it would require her to have expectations she had no right to. At the gallery's end, where a pair of doors opened onto a corridor leading back toward the main house, Frederick stepped forward and held one of the doors open. Not the footman stationed beside it. Him. Catherine walked through. Her back was straight. Her face was composed. Inside the architecture of her composure she was doing something she had not done in years, which was failing entirely to assess a situation with any useful clarity. Aldous fell into step beside her as the group moved back through the corridor. He said nothing for perhaps 20 paces. Then, he does not usually ask about the portraits. He said it quietly. It was not gossip and it was not explanation. It was a single fact, offered once. Catherine looked straight ahead. I see, she said. She did not see. That was precisely the problem. The library was the one room in the palace where protocol thinned to almost nothing, and he had known that when he suggested it. He had not suggested it to her directly. He had suggested it, through Aldous, to no one in particular, that the library's donated volumes required informal cataloging, that the charitable society might have use of the catalogue, that the room was available in the afternoon if any member of the Countess's party found themselves at leisure. The Countess was resting. The committee chairwoman was writing letters. Catherine found herself at leisure by the simple elimination of alternatives. The library had 4 walls of books, 2 armchairs before a fire that had been lit recently and, specifically, the grate was too clean for it to have been burning long, and rain on the tall windows that made the room feel enclosed in a way that was either comfortable or dangerous depending on your situation. Catherine chose a shelf, found the catalog cards, and began. It was a good library. Someone had used it. The spine showed wear in the right places, not display wear, not uniform, but the wear of particular favorites returned to repeatedly. She noted the titles. She made her cards. The fire was warm. The rain was consistent. She was almost calm. The door opened 20 minutes later. She did not turn around. She heard him settle into the farther armchair. The sound of a book being taken from a side table. Pages. Then, nothing but the fire and the rain. For some time this was the complete inventory of the room. Then, he said, "What are you cataloging?" She told him. He asked a question about the Fenwick collection, a donated set from a Norfolk estate, and she answered, and they were talking about books, which was comfortable ground, which was a landscape she knew, until it became apparent they were talking about something underneath the books, the way conversations sometimes do when the people in them have stopped performing. He said, Fenwick argued that the novel's proper purpose was consolation. He was wrong, Catherine said. A pause. Oh. She had already said it. There was no retrieving it. The novel's proper purpose is accuracy. Consolation is a side effect. When it comes first, you get sentiment. Sentiment is, she stopped. Sentiment is what? A well-made lie, she said. Your Grace. She added the title 3 beats too late. She knew it. He knew it. The fire knew it. You disagree, he said. Not a reprimand. Not surprise. Something more careful than either. Yes, she said. I do. Silence. The rain on the glass was very precise. She looked at the titles on the spine she could not reach from where she stood, the top shelf, running letters in gold she could not fully make out from the ground, and counted the letters she could see. Garden. I was told once, Frederick said, that the purpose of my position was consolation. That the institution exists to reassure the public that certain things remain stable. She waited. I have spent, he said, a considerable amount of time wondering whether that makes the institution a well-made lie. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the fire. His expression was not the expression of a man making a point. It was the expression of a man who had said something he had been carrying long enough that setting it down, even here, even once, was a relief he had not quite planned for. She did not say, I understand. She did not say, that must be difficult. She understood the discipline of not naming what you were not prepared to fully expose. I think, she said, that accuracy and consolation are not always opposites. I think sometimes the most accurate thing is also the most comforting. Not because it softens anything. Because it is true. He looked at her then. The way people look at a piece of furniture that has been moved, quite certain something is different, unable to name what. She went back to her catalogue cards. That night she lay down in the Countess's guest room and closed her eyes, and the particular quality of dark behind them was different from its usual quality, and she could not have said how. She had not slept well in years. She slept. Lady Vaincroft's voice was the kind that carried without effort and landed with precision. She found Catherine in the corridor outside the morning room on the third day, which was not an accident. Catherine understood immediately that it was not an accident the way you understand that a room has been rearranged before you have identified which pieces have moved. Lady Vaincroft was 60, or performed 60 with great discipline, and wore the kind of composure that had never needed to be assembled because it had never come apart. She had the flat, assessing eyes of someone who had spent decades calculating the load-bearing capacity of people. Miss Ashworth, she said. Her tone was a social temperature that had no name but was universally recognized. Lady Vaincroft. Catherine's chin. Shoulders. Hands. In that order. I hope you have found your stay comfortable. This was not a pleasantry. Very. Lady Ashby has been well looked after. Indeed. A pause, precisely waited. I wonder if I might speak frankly. People who asked permission to speak frankly had already decided to. Of course, Catherine said. What followed was not a conversation. It was an assessment delivered in the form of one. Lady Vaincroft spoke about the demands of public life on those who occupied prominent positions. She spoke about the importance of appropriate connections during a period of institutional sensitivity. She spoke about her niece, Miss Honoria Vaincroft, who had known His Grace since childhood and whose particular qualities of breeding and temperament made her. Here the flat eyes settled on Catherine with the precision of a surveyor taking a measurement, an appropriate companion for the road ahead. She did not say, leave. She said everything necessary for Catherine to understand that leaving was the only remaining option. Catherine stood through it with her chin level and her hands still and her face in the architecture it needed to be in. She said, "Thank you for your candor, Lady Vaincroft." She curtsied. She walked back toward the east stairs. The Countess's maid found her an hour later to tell her, with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they had not sourced by accident, that an announcement was expected in the court circular before the week's end. The Duke of Clarence and Miss Honoria Vaincroft. The families had been in correspondence for some time. Catherine thanked her. She was very calm. She was calm in the way that a particular kind of cold is calm, total, final, without violence. She went to her room. It was a small room, as guest rooms in houses like this went when they were given to companions rather than guests, overlooking the kitchen garden, which was at this hour in mid-November a geometry of frost and bare espalier branches. She did not light the additional lamp. The daylight through the window was enough for what she needed to do. She folded the sapphire dress. She did this carefully. She was always careful with it. The altered seams, the replaced buttons, each one her mother's, required a particular fold at the shoulder to prevent creasing, and she did this with her hands and her full attention, smoothing the crepe, aligning the hem. It was the last time she would wear it here. She would not ruin it with whatever came after. She set it on the chair. She looked at the frost on the window glass. One crystal, she traced it with one fingertip, following its branching, its small meticulous geometry. She followed it to the edge of the pane. She followed it back. She was not crying. She noted this as a fact. She began to fold her second dress into her traveling bag. She was methodical. She had always been methodical. The methodical approach to departure was one she had practiced, in smaller ways, across 11 years in other people's houses. You left correctly. You left without a scene. You thanked the appropriate people and you did not make your feelings into a problem for anyone else to solve. She had no right to him. She had never had a right to him. What she felt, she stopped, because she had been feeling it for 3 days and had been calling it something else, and there was no longer a name she could use instead. What she felt was not his problem to manage. He should not have to sacrifice anything for a clergyman's daughter in a remade dress. The thought of him doing so was worse, actually, than the alternative. She recognized, in the dark of that small room above the frost-covered garden, that the truest thing she had done in a long time was this decision, made alone, without audience, that she would not be a cost he had to bear. She was almost done packing when the knock came. She opened the door. Aldous. His expression was the expression of a man performing neutrality with exquisite precision. Miss Ashworth. Mr. Pemberton. He asks, Aldous said, that you do not leave before morning. A pause in which the frost on the glass did not change and the kitchen garden was still and the corridor was very quiet. He asks, she repeated. Yes, Miss Ashworth. She looked at the bag on the bed. At the dress on the chair. At the particular quality of the winter dark outside. She said nothing for long enough that Aldous remained in the doorway with the patience of a man employed specifically because he could do this. I will consider it, she said. Aldous nodded once, and went. Morning came gray and exact, the way consequences always do. Catherine dressed in her traveling clothes because this was what she had decided, and she was a person who dressed for her decisions rather than hedging them. Charcoal wool, good but plain. Her hair put up correctly. The sapphire dress refolded in the bag. She carried the bag herself because she was not going to ask a footman to assist with a departure she was conducting with as little machinery as possible. The entrance hall of the east wing was a black and white tiled room of considerable size, lit at this hour by winter light through high windows and a fire laid but recently in the grate opposite the doors. Catherine descended the final stair with her chin at the correct angle and her bag in her right hand and her face in the architecture that had served her for a decade and a half of rooms that were not hers. Frederick was standing in the entrance hall. Not Aldous. Not a footman. Not the receiving secretary. Him, in a morning coat that he wore with his usual economy, standing near the center of the tiled floor as though he had arranged himself there by considered choice and had been there long enough to be settled. On the half-landing above, Lady Vaincroft stood at the railing. Her expression was a controlled surface over something Catherine could not and did not need to read. In the doorway of the morning room, the Countess, upright, in her day dress, remarkable for a woman who had been confined to a chaise the previous afternoon, was watching with the expression of someone who had seen several seasons of human drama and retained the capacity to be interested. 3 members of the household staff were present in the various functions of a normal morning. They were all, very precisely, going about their business. Catherine stopped at the foot of the stairs. Frederick looked at her. Not with the expression she had expected, not with the declaration she had braced herself against, not with the urgency of a man overriding a decision he had not been permitted to make, but with the attention she had first noticed in a gallery full of candlelight. Specific. Held. The announcement in the court circular, he said, has been withdrawn. He said it at a conversational volume. He did not raise his voice for the room. He did not need to. I have spoken with Lady Vaincroft about the limits of her remit in matters that concern my own household. On the landing, something in Lady Vaincroft's posture became very still. "I would consider it," Frederick said, and now there was a very slight modulation, not warmth exactly, something more precise than warmth, something that required accuracy to be accurate, a personal matter, if Miss Ashworth were to leave this house before she was ready to leave it. The entrance hall was very quiet. The fire in the grate had settled. Somewhere in the upper house a clock was measuring out its intervals. Catherine looked at the door. The main door, at the hall's far end, was not locked. It had not been locked. The traveling bag was in her hand. She could still walk through it, out into the grey November morning, down the drive, and away, and she could do this with the composure intact, and she could return to her room in Marylebone and the Countess's letters and the small ordered dignity of a life that asked nothing impossible of her. She looked at the floor. The black and white tiles had a border she had not noticed before. Small flowers. 8-petaled, precisely spaced, running the full perimeter of the entrance hall. She had walked across this floor twice. She had not seen them. She looked at the bag in her hand. She looked at Frederick, who was waiting with the patience of a man who had decided something and was prepared to stand in an entrance hall for as long as standing was required. She set the bag down. Not dramatically. Not with any performance for the room above or the room adjacent. She simply set it on the tiled floor and straightened and was no longer holding it. This was not a decision about him. She understood this with a clarity that arrived without announcement and required no examination. It was a decision about whether she was worth staying for. Whether the person who had worn a remade dress into a room full of people who spent more on their gloves than her quarterly wage, whether that person had been right, the whole time, to take up her own space. She had been right. She had simply been waiting, across 11 years of other people's houses, for a room in which she was permitted to know it. Frederick offered his arm. She took it. The Countess, in the doorway of the morning room, smiled at no one in particular. It was a smile that had been waiting, one suspected, for the better part of 3 days. On the half-landing, Lady Vaincroft withdrew from the railing without a word. Her footsteps were precise and measured and retreated in the direction of the upper corridor until they were no longer audible. The fire settled again in the grate. The tiles were very clean, and the small 8-petaled flowers ran their quiet border around the edge of the room. Catherine did not look back at the bag on the floor. There was nothing in it, it turned out, that she needed.